Have you ever stopped to wonder, what will it really feel like to grow old, alone? Not just older in age, but in presence. The house grows quieter. The phone rings less. The calendar, once filled with birthdays and visits, now sits blank, except for the occasional doctor's appointment. You spent your whole life giving, raising children, caring for your spouse, working tirelessly. And now, the days stretch longer, the silence louder. No one prepared you for this chapter, did they? The one where you sit by the window, watching the world carry on without you. It's not that your family doesn't care. They do. But life as it does has swept them along, leaving you with memories that echo louder than their footsteps. But must it be this way? Must the final act of your life be written in solitude? Or is there still something more waiting for you? Something meaningful, beautiful, and yours? This is not just about aging. It's about reclaiming the power to live fully, even in the quiet. It's about finding connection in unexpected places and rediscovering a life that still holds purpose. Because you, dear friend, are not done yet. Part 1. The silence that grows. You planned for this stage of life, didn't you? You saved carefully, paid off the mortgage, maybe even downsized the house. You made all the right decisions. Financially, you're steady. You did your part. And yet, there's a silence you never accounted for. A silence that doesn't come from the absence of sound, but from the absence of presence. The days move slower now. Mornings arrive without urgency. The coffee brews, the paper arrives, but no one's asking how you slept or what you dreamt. The hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock, these have become your companions. They fill the room with just enough noise to remind you what's missing. Your son used to call every week. Now it's only when there's an emergency. Your daughter stops by, kisses you on the cheek, says, "I wish I could stay longer," then rushes out the door. You smile, you nod, you understand. But deep inside, a quiet ache settles, heavier with each passing visit. And still you wonder, is this what it all comes down to? After a lifetime of loving, building, giving, do we end up forgotten? Not because we are unloved, but because life moves on without asking permission. You are not alone in feeling this. According to the National Poll on Healthy Aging, 1 in 3 older adults in the U.S. feels ignored or forgotten by their children. This is not just data, it's reality. It's your reality and the reality of millions who quietly carry the weight of being invisible. But here's a thought. What if the silence isn't a dead end, but a doorway? What if the stillness, as painful as it feels, is also an invitation? A chance to rediscover your own voice, your own rhythm, your own worth outside of what you once were to others? Because the most frightening thing about aging isn't death, it's fading. Fading from memory, from conversation, from meaning. But you are not fading. You are still here, and the life within you still burns, even if the world forgets to look your way. So what now? Perhaps it's time to reclaim the space you're in, to reach out, to reconnect, to redefine what it means to be visible. Join that community group. Say hello to a neighbor. Call a friend from years ago. Or simply sit with yourself in peace and know, you matter. Yes, the silence may grow, but you can speak into it. You can choose to be heard again. And in doing so, you remind not only others, but yourself that this chapter still counts. That you still count. Because your story is not over. Not yet. Not today. Part 2. The fall that woke you up. It didn't take much. Just a wet tile in the backyard, an early morning chill, and one misplaced step. You slipped. Fell. It wasn't dramatic. No broken bones. No ambulance sirens. But it was enough. Enough to leave you lying there for minutes that felt like hours. Enough to remind you that no one knew you were out there. No one was coming. You'd been careful your whole life. Strong, independent, always the one others leaned on. But in that moment, staring up at the sky from the cold ground, a quiet truth settled into your chest. You're not being looked after anymore. You managed to pull yourself up, slowly, achingly. You limped inside, sat down, and you didn't cry. But oh, how the weight of that silence stung. Not from the pain in your joints, but from the realization that if something worse had happened, no one would have known. No one would have found you. That night, the thoughts swirled, not with panic, but with clarity. You weren't angry at your children. You understood. They had their lives, but for the first time, you saw it plainly. Your safety, your health, your life, it's in your hands now. So you decided. The next morning, you did something you hadn't done in years. You walked into the local senior center. No expectations, just a quiet step towards something different. You filled out a registration form with shaking hands, signed up for a beginner's chess group, and said yes when someone offered you tea. That's all it took. A yes. Later that week, you ordered a medical alert necklace. Not out of fear, but out of responsibility. You weren't preparing to die. You were preparing to keep living, on your terms. Then you called an old friend, just to say hello. They didn't pick up. You left a message anyway. Your voice was softer than you remembered, but it was yours. You were using it again. And in those small, almost invisible shifts, something began to change. The silence in your home didn't vanish, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It became a companion, a space you could fill if you wanted to. And you did, because life didn't leave you behind. It waited, patiently, until you were ready to return. So you returned, not as the person you once were, but as someone choosing to connect, choosing to care, choosing to live not for others but with yourself. And that fall, it wasn't a sign of weakness. It was the beginning of your rise. Part 3, a gentle light named Margaret. You didn't expect her, not at this age, not at this stage of life. You weren't looking for love or even friendship. You were simply trying to exist again, one quiet day at a time. But then, there she was, Margaret. Her smile wasn't loud or bright, but warm, like the sun through curtains in the early morning, soft, unassuming, and exactly what your heart didn't know it needed. She sat next to you in the community room, watching others play chess. No grand gestures, just a kind nod, and a presence that made the room feel a little less empty. Over time, words began to pass between you. Not many at first. A comment about the weather, a chuckle over the coffee being too weak. Then, slowly, stories, laughter, silence that felt peaceful, not hollow. She had her own losses, her own memories, her own used to be. You didn't try to replace what was gone. Neither of you did. That's not what this was about. This wasn't about recapturing youth. It was about honoring the present. Two souls, weathered and wise, choosing to sit beside each other, not because they had to, but because it felt good to. You began doing simple things together. A walk to the park, grocery runs, cooking meals just for two. You realized how comforting it was to hear someone say, "See you tomorrow." How rare that had become. And still, a part of you wrestled with guilt. You thought of your late wife. You worried that opening your heart again might feel like a betrayal. But deep down you knew. Love doesn't erase love, it expands it. Margaret didn't ask for promises. She didn't need labels. She simply showed up again and again with patience and kindness. And slowly the walls you'd built around your heart began to soften. The days felt warmer, the house less still. You started humming again while cooking, smiling at your reflection in the mirror, remembering what it felt like to be seen. Because what Margaret gave you wasn't a second chance at romance. It was a second chance at companionship, at feeling alive in the quiet moments, at remembering that even now your story could still hold new chapters, gentle ones, beautiful ones. She didn't replace the past. She simply reminded you that the future, whatever remains of it, still has something to offer. And for the first time in a long while, you didn't dread the silence of evening, because you knew somewhere out there, someone else was sitting by a window too, maybe thinking of you. Part 4, letting go and choosing peace. You knew it couldn't last forever. You just didn't think the end would come so soon, or so quietly. One morning, Margaret sat across from you at the kitchen table, her tea untouched, her eyes softer than usual but distant. You felt it before she said a word. Something had shifted. She gently told you her son was getting married, and he wanted her to move in with him, to help with his growing family. A new beginning for him, and a goodbye for the two of you. Your heart didn't break like it had before. Not violently. This time it cracked slowly, like the soft sound of wood splitting in the cold. You smiled. You told her how happy you were for her. You meant it. But inside you felt something collapse. Quietly. Painfully. She said she had grown used to being with you. That this little routine, the meals, the walks, the quiet evenings, had become her comfort. But she had to go. And you understood. Family calls and sometimes love means letting someone leave when they must. You helped her pack. You folded sweaters that still smelled like her. You loaded her suitcase into the back seat. You drove her to the bus station, each mile a memory, each red light a plea to time. Slow down, just a little longer. And when the bus pulled away, you stood there, not waving, not crying, just standing, watching the space where she used to be. The emptiness settled back into your life like an old friend, familiar and unwelcome. Returning home was the hardest part. The chair she loved, now still. The two mugs on the shelf, now untouched. You kept expecting her to walk through the door, humming under her breath, telling you about a sale she found at the market. But the silence stayed. You realized something then. This kind of solitude was different. It wasn't just loneliness. It was the absence of hope. And that's when you made a choice. You called your son, calmly, gently. You said you'd been thinking about it for a while, and maybe it was time to move somewhere new, somewhere with people your age, somewhere you didn't have to wonder when someone might check in. Not because you'd given up, but because you were ready to start over again. One more time. You weren't running from solitude. You were walking toward peace. A few weeks later, you packed your things. This time, you didn't just fold clothes. You folded memories. You left behind a house, but not yourself. You brought with you everything that still mattered. Your stories, your strength, your willingness to begin again. Because sometimes letting go isn't the end of love. It's the beginning of freedom. Part 5, a new kind of home. It wasn't the home you imagined for your later years. No creaky porch swing. No garden you planted with your own hands. No walls echoing with the laughter of your children. But still, there was something here. Something different. The nursing home sat quietly in the suburbs, tucked beneath old oak trees and beside a winding footpath that smelled of pine after rain. On your first day, you arrived not with excitement, but with resolve. You weren't here because you had nowhere else to go. You were here because you had chosen this. The room was simple. A bed, a window, a chair by the wall. But it was clean, peaceful, and as you unpacked, you didn't feel grief. You felt relief. For the first time in a long while, you didn't have to carry everything on your own. That evening, someone knocked gently on your door. A man named Mr. Robinson, tall, kind-eyed, a few years older than you, asked if you'd like to join a game of checkers. You hesitated, then said yes. Funny how quickly strangers can become part of your rhythm. Within days, you had a table at breakfast where others saved you a seat. You joined a book club, even though your eyes tired easily. You laughed again, genuinely. Not out of politeness, but out of recognition. These people had lived, lost, loved, just like you. They didn't ask you to explain yourself. They just nodded, because they understood. Your children called more often now. They seemed less worried somehow. Maybe because when they asked, "How are you, Dad?" you answered and meant it. "I'm doing well. You don't have to worry about me." You began to notice the little joys again. The way the sun poured across the linoleum floor in the late afternoon. The birds that gathered at the feeder just outside your window. The way another resident's laughter reminded you of someone you once knew. You didn't forget Margaret, or your wife, or the life you once had. But instead of holding on to the past with clenched fists, you let it rest gently in your hands, grateful but not bound. You had space now, not just in your room, but in your heart. And in that space, new things began to grow. Stillness, clarity, grace. This wasn't a final chapter. It was just a quieter one. And maybe the most honest of all. Because here you didn't have to prove anything. You didn't have to be strong every day. You just had to be, and that was enough. For the first time in years, you fell asleep without the weight of the world on your chest. Not because life was easier, but because you had finally given yourself permission to breathe. Part 6. When love must be let go, but never lost. You didn't think it would happen like that. Not on an ordinary afternoon, not after a quiet lunch and a gentle laugh, but life in its quiet cruelty rarely gives us warning. The phone rang. There had been an accident. Mrs. Robinson, the one who always saved you a seat at breakfast, the one who teased you for reading the same mystery novel twice, the one who reminded you that laughter didn't age, and neither did kindness. Now she was in the hospital. And you felt the weight of those few words like bricks on your chest. You went, of course, as fast as they could take you. You sat beside her bed, holding a hand that once felt so strong, now paper-thin and still. The beeping machines didn't comfort you. The hushed footsteps of nurses didn't reassure you. Only the silence between your breaths reminded you, she's still here, for now. And when her eyes fluttered open for the last time, you saw something in them. Not fear, not regret, but softness, as if to say, thank you for being here. And then she whispered, barely audible, live well. 2 words, a lifetime in them. And then, silence. You stayed there, long after the machines had quieted. You didn't cry, not immediately. You just sat, as though your stillness might somehow hold her memory in place. You held her hand until it was no longer warm, until goodbye was no longer a choice, but a fact. Back at the nursing home, everything felt smaller, the hallway colder, her chair in the garden untouched, her laugh, an echo now, more imagined than real. Grief returned, not like the crashing wave that had drowned you before, but like a slow, rising tide. A tide you could not stop, only float upon. But you also remembered something she once told you, over a game of cards. You don't stop living just because someone you love stops breathing. And so, you began again. Not because you were ready, but because she had asked you to. You started walking the halls again. You brought tea to the new residents. You told her favorite jokes to others, even when your voice shook. You sat in her chair sometimes just to feel close. And sometimes late at night, you whispered into the dark, I'm trying, because grief is not about forgetting. It's about carrying, gently, respectfully, the people who shaped us, and continuing to live, not in spite of them, but for them. Her final gift to you wasn't her presence. It was her parting words, a simple reminder that even love that ends in death doesn't really end at all. It lingers, it guides. And when the quiet comes again, as it always does, you are not alone in it, because she is still there, in memory, in meaning, in you. Part 7, what remains after everything time moved on, but differently now. It no longer rushed past you like a blur. It walked beside you, softly, gently, like a companion who knew your pace. The days at the nursing home settled into a rhythm. Breakfast, sunlight in the garden, quiet afternoons with books or conversation. You still missed her. You always would. But grief, once sharp and heavy, had softened. It had become part of you. No longer a wound, but a scar that no longer bled. And somehow that scar made you kinder. You noticed people more. The way Mr. Delgado sat alone each lunch, waiting for someone to say hello. The way new residents looked lost on their first day, like you once did. So you reached out. Sometimes with words, sometimes just with presence. You became what Margaret had been for you, a steady light. And that perhaps was the most unexpected gift of all. You weren't just surviving old age. You were living it with meaning. You weren't anyone's parent here, not someone's spouse, not someone's burden. You were simply Walter, and that was enough. One evening, your daughter Emily visited. She brought her youngest, a curious little boy with big eyes. He looked around your room and asked, Grandpa, do you get lonely here? You smiled, not a forced smile, a real one. No, you said, not anymore. And as you watched him run through the garden paths, chasing butterflies, you felt a strange but beautiful feeling. Wholeness. You had loved. You had lost. you had lived. And through it all, you had learned what mattered most. Not the titles, not the possessions, but the connections, the small moments, the choice to keep showing up for yourself and for others. So what remains after everything? After the quiet birthdays and tearful goodbyes, after the long nights and short phone calls, what remains is you. Not the you from long ago, not the you others expected you to be, but the you who chose to rise again every time life tried to press you down. The you who reached out, even when your hands trembled. The you who softened instead of hardening. The you who found peace not in perfection, but in presence. And when the time comes, because it always does, you will not leave empty. You will leave behind warmth, memory, a quiet legacy of compassion. You may not be remembered in history books, but you'll be remembered in someone's laughter, in someone's courage to keep going, in someone's ability to say, I'm not alone, because you were here, you lived, you mattered, and that is enough. As we come to the end of this video, take a moment just for yourself. Breathe, reflect, let the quiet in, because sometimes it's in that silence that we finally hear what our hearts have been trying to tell us all along. Growing older isn't about fading away, it's about growing deeper. It's about carrying love, loss, and lessons more gently, more wisely. Maybe the world outside feels faster now, more distant, but that doesn't mean your story is over. Not at all. You still have so much to give, so much to feel, so much to remember, and maybe even more to discover. Whether you're living alone or surrounded by family, whether you feel strong today or a little weary, please know this: you matter. Your voice matters. Your presence still lights up a space. If this video moved you, if even a part of it resonated with something you felt in your own life, don't keep it to yourself. Please share it with a friend, a sibling, or anyone who might need to hear this today. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please hit like, subscribe, and share. Your support helps us continue to create gentle, heartfelt stories that uplift, especially for those of you walking through this meaningful and often quiet stage of life. And if you feel comfortable, leave a comment below. Share a memory, a lesson, or simply a few words. What part of this video touched you the most? We read every comment, and each one inspires us more than you know. Thank you for being here. Thank you for still believing in connection, in love, and in second chances. We look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, take care of your heart. You are not alone. You never were.